At all times, the mankind took interest in the question of God. Analysis of all information about God known to mankind shows that the most common notion is the idea of God, Creator and Pantocrator, one for all existing on earth as a universal transcendent reality. God is not indifferent to what is happening on earth. Therefore, at critical moments of civilization development, there always appeared prophets, the human beings who were able to express and communicate to the others the information from on high, showing the way to a fair life. They delivered to people the idea of creation of God's kingdom on earth by people themselves under the guidance of God. Since that time, the kingdom of God is preached, and every man presseth into it. We have revealed to you, O men, a book, in which is a message for you. Will ye not then understand? But implementation of this idea goes against the plans of a small group of parasites occupying the top of social pyramid. They do their best to prevent people from putting this idea into life by counteracting the consequences of the prophets coming, by deliberate distortion of the information delivered by prophets, aiming at use of the information in their clannish interests. Having announced themselves as the chosen ones, these parasites started to impose their purposes, hiding behind the name of God and establishing various religious corporations of mediators between God and a human being. Then woe to those who write the book with their own hands and then say, "This is from Allah," to traffic with it for miserable price. Woe to them for what their hands do write and for the gain they make thereby. The uprising of religious corporations and cults became possible since God had given people the freedom of choice of their own way of living, and since God does not make a slave of a man, but gives him the possibility to find and correct mistakes himself, speaking to a human being the language of his living circumstances. And each human being can communicate with God directly, without any mediators. For this a man should ask himself, does God exist? Does he make mistakes despite his omnipotence? Do I trust him in my life? If a man is attentive to the events taking place in his life, then he can see if he is getting closer to God by his deeds, or if he is moving away from him. Allah does not change a people's lot unless they change what is in their hearts. The kingdom of God cometh not with observation, neither shall they say, Lo here, or lo there, for behold, the kingdom of God is within you. Now these parasites, under whose external control the Western civilization was built, based on the algorithm described in the Bible, are faced with one big problem, represented mainly by Quranic Islam. The problem is that the Quran denies the concept of Jews as the people chosen by God, and names the usury of any kind as a deadly sin. But particularly these two main concepts, which among other things underlie the Bible project of enslaving all in the name of God, are being put into life surreptitiously and inviolately, though they are not directly declared, mentioned in writing, or discussed anywhere. And despite the fact that those who consider themselves Muslims do not realize this, the wheeler-dealers of the Bible project understand that the Quran is a potential menace for them. This arouses a desire to leave the Quran in the historical past. One of the ways to resolve the problem of Islam for the Western wheeler-dealers is the multi-optional policy. Step 1. The creation of caliphate that should include almost all the nations that will perceive Islam in its historically set form as traditional religion. Step 2. The beginning by the caliphate of the world war in order to uproot the godless Western liberalism and faithless creed. The imposition of Islam as the global religion for the whole humankind. The next step will depend on the war outcome. In case the Western countries win, Quran will follow the fate of Mein Kampf, and the traditional Islamic countries will undergo the process of de-Islamization, similar to the way both German states went through the process of denazification after the end of the Second World War in the 20th century. In case caliphate wins, the Islamic ritualism will become a standard for all the people of the appeared global caliphate. The crowd without Arabic knowledge won't be able to read Quran themselves and will be controlled by mullahs. Apparently, now all of the Muslim countries hope that such way of government can be implemented. Even in the countries where the majority of population is represented by native speakers of Arabic, Muslims idolize their prayer mat, not capable of correlating their lives with Quran, bringing their lifestyle and ideals far from Quranic testaments that exclude any tyranny of people over people. Mullahs represent professional corporation of ideologists that will interpret life with reference to Quran, taking into consideration the interests of their backstage owners, the same way as done with Taliban in Afghanistan and the Muslim priesthood in all the countries. Mullahs are fixated on ritualism and are not able to discover and solve the real problems of public life. To confirm this statement, one can observe the last centuries of Muslim countries' history that fall behind the Western countries in science and technology development and that couldn't elaborate a more effective alternative to the Western mode of life. As the next step, when the power of mullahs will become hated, we will face global anti-Islamic rebellion, the end of mullahs' power, and the society will undergo the process of de-Islamization. The Quran will be taken away from the publicity and put to the libraries to be cited by the authorized historians only. These historians will do their best to prove that the humankind was saved from such a great evil. Western middlebrows don't even understand that Quran and Islam have become the main objects of the purposeful calumny and discredit. Middlebrows are incredibly not in position to take Quran, read it as message addressed to them personally, and to correlate Quran with real life, so that to notice all the calumny against Quran and the Muslims' deviation from the true Quran message. Nowadays, first stage of this multi-optional policy is being deliberately implemented. In the Islamic world, those regimes adherent to the Muslim traditionalism and not displaying aggression towards otherwise minded neighbors are being attacked by the opposition of pseudo-Islamic fundamentalist radicals. The Muslim culture is portrayed as enemy. For this purpose, the role of this enemy again goes to the same pseudo-Islamic fundamentalist radicals that undermine their regimes of Muslim traditionalists and display aggressiveness towards different-minded people. To resolve this problem, global terrorist issue was picked up under the signboard of Al-Qaeda. The fight of the West against Al-Qaeda is purposely done by such means that in the Islamic world is perceived as Western aggression. This leads to the appearance of favorable crowd scene for the pseudo-Islamic fundamentalist radicals. Almost all traditionally Muslim countries are involved in this scenario. Afghanistan is used as the platform for drugs flow, as one of the means to sow seeds of hatred towards outside the Muslim cultural area. Pakistan is chosen to display instability of the government under Muslim traditionalism and to be further accused for nuclear technologies leak to other Muslim countries and extremists. Iran is accused of the lust to possess nuclear weapons. The goal of the Western policy towards Pakistan and Iran is to create caliphate, since Muslim nuclear power would be perceived in the world as real and inescapable threat. The nuclear potentials of caliphate are not planned to be developed to the level fatally dangerous to the West, but it will always be implied in propaganda in order to keep nuclear motive to trigger the coalition war of Western states against the caliphate. For example, this could take place by a single nuclear attack on some countries, taking Israel for one. Caliphate should necessarily be the anti-Semite state, so it could be rated as the follower of the Third Reich. Saudi Arabia and the Persian Gulf states are expected to finance their Muslim brothers working for the caliphate. Iraq is planned to be the place for radicalization of hatred towards Western countries to become the capital of caliphate after NATO troops withdrawal, and to be the field of last fight between the good and the evil. One of the options of the above-mentioned multi-optional policy includes the possibility of breaking up of Russia, adding Russian Muslim areas to caliphate. In case this scenario fails, Russia is planned to become one of the first victims of the Caliphate aggression and the main field of war between the West and the Caliphate. Traditional Islam priesthood has fenced themselves with Quran and ritualism from God, from problems of people and society on the whole, with lives concentrated on the momentary self-interest, and therefore doesn't analyze the global scale events. As a result, it doesn't perceive this scenario, and in case someone notices it, the momentary self-interest is more important for him than unselfish efforts to prevent disasters, the potentials of which have been purposely created by the others for several decades. That's why the traditional Islam is not able to work out a more efficient scenario of the global policy that could become an alternative to the one mentioned above, not to be involved into the anti-Islamic variant. The leaders of other confessions represent the same ritualism addicts as the leadership of Muslims, and that's why everything said about the inability of the Muslim traditionalist priesthood has reference to them as well. The incapability of the countries, both Muslim and Western, involved in this scenario implementation leads to the fact that it could be broken only through the initiative of people, individuals and public organizations. The multi-optional policy aimed at breeding civilizations' conflict does not have the right party. It is impossible to avoid the conflict, thinking that we can all live in peace based on our traditional beliefs, not interfering into the cultures of each other, for two reasons. Reason 1. Norms of social organization and ethics, appropriate for the traditional cultures, don't coincide in all aspects, and in some points are objectively controversial. Reason 2. There are transnational political networks in the world that reach their goals by creation of managed conflicts on the basis of artificial actualization of different contradictions, objectively appropriate for traditional cultures. The committed basis to prevent the above-mentioned multi-optional policy could be the acceptance of the fact that the sociological core of all revelations that were the source for the so-called Abrahamian religions is the idea that people themselves should create and live in prosperity on the earth of God, under God's guidance. In this world, no one will be slave to another, and all the people will live in freedom, developing their individual potentials on the basis of dialogue with God while living. The idea of creation of the kingdom of God on earth, through the efforts of people themselves, under the God's guidance, is the single idea, the distribution of which, in different cultural societies, can ruin the potential of the above scenario of multi-optional policy that leads to the conflict aimed at leaving Quran in the historical legacy of the humankind. Let there arise out of you a band of people inviting to all that is good, enjoining what is right and forbidding what is wrong. They are the ones to attain felicity. The question arises, what can and must each human being do to disrupt the implementation of this scenario? It is necessary to come to a direct dialogue with God, that is, to a non-denominational level. Then it becomes clear that all the confessions were established to divide and, if required, embroil people, thus realizing the principle divide and rule. The problems of Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq and other countries and diasporas following the historically set Islam can be creatively resolved only on the basis of initiatives of the people, directed at creating Kingdom of God on earth. Unity, an oracle of our century has said, can only be welded by iron and blood. Well, we'll try welding it with love. Let's see which lasts the longer.